We're outnumbered. 50-1 exclamation mark. The scream echoed over radio as bullets tore across the airport tarmac. 300 Marines were pinned against the defensive wall with nowhere to retreat. The commander collapsed, choking out, "We'll die here!" Suddenly, the ground shook. Apache rotors sliced through the night sky. Radio crackled with a determined female voice. "Hold your ground. I'm coming in hot." Fire blazed across the battlefield. The entire war zone held its breath. Reina Vasquez was 28 years old, an Apache pilot with a lean frame, long brown hair, and sharp eyes that always looked downward when she was among crowds. At the base, Reina was consistently underestimated and dismissed. Apaches are only good for ground support. They're not fast enough to survive real combat. Put her in a major battle, and the whole squadron will get wiped out. She should be doing logistics, not frontline combat. Young soldiers would mock her regularly. She belongs in supply, not on the battlefield. Reina remained silent through all of this, meticulously maintaining her Apache, checking each rocket, cleaning the Vulcan cannon, running her hands over chipped paint and battle scars. One night in the hangar, she whispered to her helicopter, "If no one else believes in me, at least you're still here." An old mechanic later recalled, "She would sit for hours in that cockpit, with the look in her eyes of someone about to go into battle, even when it was just a routine duty day." What her critics didn't understand was that Reina had chosen the Apache for reasons that went deeper than assignment or capability. She had once flown faster aircraft in more prestigious roles, but she had learned that in real combat, what mattered wasn't speed or glamour. It was the ability to provide sustained fire support when people's lives depended on it. The Apache wasn't the fastest helicopter, but it was the most heavily armed. It wasn't the stealthiest, but it could absorb damage that would destroy lighter aircraft. Most importantly, it was designed specifically to protect ground forces in impossible situations. That philosophy matched Reina's own evolution as a pilot. She had stopped caring about personal recognition or prestigious assignments. She cared about keeping people alive when everything else failed. But her fellow pilots saw her choice as evidence of limited ambition or capability. They assigned her to routine patrols and support missions, keeping her away from major operations where her skills might actually be needed. During briefings, when complex missions were discussed, officers would often ignore her input entirely. When she suggested Apache support for dangerous ground operations, she was usually dismissed with comments like, "We need real air support, not just a glorified flying tank." Reina absorbed these insults without complaint. She knew that her critics had never been in situations where the difference between success and catastrophe was measured in minutes of sustained fire support. They had never seen what happened when fast attack aircraft had to leave the battlefield because of fuel limitations or threats, leaving ground forces exposed and vulnerable. She believed that eventually, there would come a moment when her Apache and her skills would be needed desperately. When speed and stealth wouldn't matter as much as raw firepower and the willingness to stay in the fight. That moment was about to arrive in the most desperate circumstances imaginable. The battle erupted at a forward airbase that had become strategically critical overnight. 300 Marines were tasked with holding the position against what intelligence had estimated as a small enemy force. But intelligence was catastrophically wrong. 15,000 enemy troops surrounded the airbase, creating odds of 50-1 against the defending Marines. Gunfire erupted from every direction. The defensive wall shook under constant bombardment. Fuel depots exploded, sending flames hundreds of feet into the night sky. Radio transmissions filled with desperate calls for help. We're outnumbered! 50 to 1. Someone, anyone, help us! In the command bunker, General Rossfield's voice broke. It's over. We'll die here. Marines began dropping their weapons, writing final letters to families they would never see again. The situation was beyond salvation by conventional means. Fast attack aircraft couldn't operate effectively in the dense anti-aircraft environment. Artillery couldn't reach the position. Reinforcements were hours away, and the Marines had minutes. At a forward operating base 20 miles away, Reina heard the emergency transmissions through her radio headset. She had been conducting a routine patrol, dismissed from the main operation like always. But as she listened to the voices of dying Marines, something inside her crystallized into absolute determination. She gripped her Apache's controls and opened her radio channel. Hold your ground. I'm coming in hot. The response from the Marines was a mixture of hope and disbelief. A single Apache? Flying into that is suicide. But Reina was already pushing her helicopter to maximum speed, racing toward a battle that every tactical manual said was unwinnable. The rotor noise grew louder as she approached the combat zone. Dust and debris swirled in the downwash as her Apache emerged from the darkness. A young Marine later recalled, "I was on my knees, ready to die. But when I heard that woman's voice over the radio, I believed I might actually live." What happened next defied every conventional understanding of helicopter combat tactics. Reina brought her Apache into the most dangerous airspace possible, directly over a battlefield saturated with anti-aircraft fire. Any rational pilot would have stayed at safe distance and provided limited support. But Reina wasn't interested in safety. She was interested in keeping 300 Marines alive. Her Apache dove into the kill zone like a bird of prey, infrared targeting systems painting enemy positions with deadly precision. The first salvo of Hydra rockets lit up the night sky, each one finding its target with surgical accuracy. Enemy positions that had been pouring fire into the Marine defensive line suddenly erupted in flames and smoke. The Vulcan cannon opened up with its distinctive brrr-t sound, 30-millimeter rounds tearing through enemy vehicles and positions at 625 rounds per minute. Marines who had been preparing to die suddenly found themselves with overwhelming air support. They grabbed their weapons and returned to the fight with renewed determination. Over the radio, veteran Marines who recognized exceptional flying when they saw it began to whisper, "It's her." Silent Hawk. The name sent chills through everyone who heard it. Silent Hawk was a legend from previous conflicts, an Apache pilot who had pulled off impossible rescues in situations where no one else could operate. But Silent Hawk had disappeared years ago after a mission that went wrong. Everyone assumed she was dead. Now she was back, turning certain defeat into possible victory, with an exhibition of helicopter combat that would be talked about for decades. As Reina continued her devastating attack runs, systematically destroying enemy positions with surgical precision, the full story of her identity began to emerge through radio chatter. "That's definitely Silent Hawk," an experienced Marine sergeant confirmed. "I've seen that flying before." The truth spread through the battlefield and back to command headquarters. The Apache pilot single-handedly changing the course of the battle was the same woman who had been legendary in previous conflicts. Reina's past as Silent Hawk included some of the most daring helicopter rescues in military history. She had extracted SEAL teams from impossible situations, provided close air support in urban environments where other aircraft couldn't operate, and saved countless lives through her willingness to fly into situations that other pilots considered suicidal. But her legend had ended abruptly 3 years earlier during a mission where her tactical decisions had saved 12 soldiers, but cost the life of her co-pilot and closest friend. The guilt had consumed her. Rather than accept medals and recognition for the successful rescue, she had blamed herself for the single casualty and requested transfer to routine support duties. She disappeared from elite operations, a military intelligence officer explained over secure channels. We thought she had left the service entirely. Instead, she had been flying routine patrols and support missions, deliberately keeping herself away from the high-stakes operations where her skills were most needed. But tonight, when 300 Marines faced certain death, she had abandoned caution and returned to the kind of flying that had made her legendary. Her Apache moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, appearing and disappearing from enemy firing positions, always one step ahead of return fire. Each rocket strike eliminated multiple enemy positions. Each cannon burst cleared entire sections of the battlefield. Her flying was so precise that she could provide close air support within meters of friendly positions without risk of friendly fire. An officer who had previously dismissed Apache capabilities watched his tactical display in amazement. "She's turning the entire battle around." The air traffic controller later wrote in his official report, "I've never seen helicopter combat like this." She wasn't just providing fire support, she was conducting a masterpiece of tactical aviation. Marines on the ground began advancing, using the cover provided by Reina's continuous fire support to recapture positions they had been forced to abandon. Enemy forces, who had been confident of victory against an outnumbered Marine force, suddenly found themselves under attack by an aircraft that seemed immune to their anti-aircraft fire. Reina's Apache took multiple hits: small arms fire, rocket-propelled grenades, even direct hits from larger weapons, but kept flying. The aircraft's armor and redundant systems were designed exactly for this kind of punishment. More importantly, Reina's flying skills allowed her to minimize exposure while maximizing effect. She used terrain masking, appeared from unexpected angles, and maintained such constant movement that enemy gunners couldn't establish effective tracking. "She's not just flying that Apache," observed a Marine colonel. "She's making it dance." After more than 40 minutes of continuous combat, far longer than most helicopter pilots could sustain in such an environment, the enemy forces began retreating. What had started as a certain massacre of outnumbered Marines had become a devastating defeat for an enemy force that had expected easy victory. General Rossfield, monitoring the battle from his command center, spoke into his headset. "Get me the pilot identification for that Apache." When the answer came back, he sat in stunned silence. Silent Hawk, the pilot they thought they had lost forever, had just saved 300 Marines using skills that no other pilot possessed. A Marine captain who had been preparing to write his final letters to family transmitted over the radio. If Silent Hawk hadn't appeared tonight, 300 Marines would be nothing but numbers in a casualty report. The battle was won, but the cost of victory was measured not in lives lost, but in the revelation that the military had been wasting its most valuable pilot on routine missions, while Marines died in battles where her skills could have made the difference. The question now was whether Reina would continue hiding from her capabilities, or whether the night's events would convince her that Silent Hawk was needed more than ever. After more than 40 minutes of continuous combat, the enemy forces retreated into the desert. The airport was covered in smoke and debris, but the Marines were alive. Reina's Apache landed on the bullet-scarred tarmac, its fuselage riddled with holes, rocket pods empty, ammunition exhausted. She opened the cockpit and climbed down, her face covered in dust and soot, her eyes red from smoke and exhaustion. 300 Marines stood in silence. Then one began to raise his hand in salute. The entire unit followed, raising their hands in perfect unison. No one spoke a word. A young Marine who had previously mocked her capabilities approached, his voice breaking with emotion. "Ma'am, if it weren't for you, we would all be ash by now." Reina simply nodded and quietly walked away. That night in the mess tent, the chair next to her remained empty, a silent acknowledgement of the space that exists around someone who has altered the course of history. A seasoned Marine sergeant who had witnessed the entire battle approached her table. "Ma'am, I've seen a lot of air support in my career. What you did tonight, that wasn't just flying. That was artistry." Another Marine, barely out of basic training, added, "I thought I was going to die tonight. I was making peace with it. Then you showed up and reminded me that some people never give up on bringing others home." A helicopter mechanic who had serviced her Apache for months spoke up. "I've been working on these birds for 15 years. I've never seen one flown like that. You made that machine do things it wasn't designed to do." General Rossfield arrived at the mess tent and approached Reina's table. Instead of words, he simply placed a mission patch on the table, the insignia of an elite aviation unit that had been trying to recruit her for years. "The offer still stands," he said quietly. "We need pilots who can do the impossible." Reina looked at the patch, then back at the general. "Those Marines didn't need the impossible tonight. They just needed someone willing to do what was necessary." "That's exactly why we need you," he replied. For the first time in 3 years, Reina began to consider that maybe Silent Hawk didn't have to remain buried in guilt and routine missions. Maybe there was a way to honor her fallen co-pilot by using her skills to prevent others from experiencing the same loss. Maybe it was time to stop running from who she really was. People once dismissed the Apache and mocked a quiet pilot who preferred routine missions. But on that night, surrounded at an airport under siege, she changed the fate of 300 souls. Reina didn't need titles or praise, just one radio transmission. "Hold your ground. I'm coming in hot." Enough to save an entire unit. The lesson is profound. Never underestimate a quiet person or an older machine. In moments of greatest desperation, they might be the only light remaining. Sometimes the most valuable people aren't the loudest or the most ambitious. Sometimes they're the most reliable, the most skilled, the most willing to risk everything when others need protection. Heroes don't always seek the spotlight. Sometimes they hide in routine duties, waiting for the moment when their skills are desperately needed to save lives that no one else can protect. If you believe that quiet heroes deserve to be remembered, leave a dot in the comments. And subscribe to SN Quiet Stories to hear more tales like this.